The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows over the small town's gas station. It was late afternoon, the kind of time when people rush to finish errands before the evening. The air smelled of gasoline and hot asphalt. Cars moved slowly. In the lot, drivers impatient to fill their tanks and get home. Marcus pulled his car into the pump and parked. He had a long day at work and only wanted to get home to relax. He rolled down his window, grabbed the gas nozzle, and started filling his car. His mind was still on the reports he had to finish for tomorrow, the emails waiting in his inbox. He didn't notice the small tensions in the air around him. Sarah was already at the station. She was a woman in her 40s, her blonde hair tied in a messy bun. She looked tense, as if she carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. Her face was tight, her jaw clenched. She was impatient, tired from a long day, and eager to get home. She glanced around the station, frowning at the people in front of her. As Sarah walked past Marcus's car toward the air pump, she didn't see him carefully holding the gas nozzle. She was thinking about her own problems, her late meeting, at work, the traffic jam she had barely escaped, and the voicemail she had yet to return. She moved quickly, brushing close to his car. Marcus felt her bump against his arm. He looked up, surprised, and said, "Excuse me?" His voice was calm, but firm. Sarah turned sharply, startled that someone had spoken to her. "Watch where you're going," she snapped, her irritation spilling over. Marcus started, raising his hand slightly in a peaceful gesture, but Sarah cut him off. Before Marcus could fully understand what was happening, Sarah slapped him across the face. The sound echoed in the small lot, a sharp crack that made birds fly from nearby trees. Marcus's head jerked from the force, and he felt a rush of shock and disbelief. The gas station went quiet for a moment. A few people who had been standing nearby froze. A young man pumping gas behind them dropped his coffee cup. Sarah's own hand was shaking slightly, but she looked angry, satisfied that she had asserted herself. Marcus touched his cheek, feeling the sting. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. For a moment, he couldn't believe what had just happened. He had been calm, polite, and respectful, and now this stranger had hit him. The world seemed to slow down around him. Then a mix of anger and self-defense surged through him. He knew he couldn't just take it. He had to react, not to hurt, but to protect himself. In a swift motion, he pushed her hand away and instinctively struck back lightly on her arm. It wasn't meant to harm, but to stop her. Sarah's eyes widened in shock. She hadn't expected him to hit back. Her mouth fell open. She looked at him as if she had seen a stranger, someone entirely unknown. For the first time, she felt fear, mixed with confusion. She had thought she could scare him, assert control, and make him back down. Instead, he had responded. The people around them murmured in surprise. Some gasped, some stepped back. The tension in the air became almost visible, heavy and thick. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to calm himself, trying to make sure things didn't escalate further. Sarah's face was pale, her anger now mixed with embarrassment and disbelief. I didn't mean—" Sarah started, but the words stumbled in her throat. She didn't know what to say. The confident, angry posture she had carried before was gone. Now she was small, unsure, facing someone who refused to be intimidated. Marcus shook his head slowly. "You shouldn't hit people," he said quietly but firmly. His voice was calm, even though his heart raced. "I don't want trouble, but I won't let anyone hit me." Sarah stared at him. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her mind raced, trying to understand how a simple bump and a slap had turned into this. She had expected fear, submission, maybe even tears, but not composure, not a measured response from him. The young man who dropped his coffee finally bent to pick it up. A few others whispered to each other. The gas station attendant peeked out from behind the counter, unsure if he should call the police or just hope the situation cooled down. Marcus felt a mix of relief and tension. Relief because he had not lost control entirely. Tension because he knew this encounter could become something bigger. He had seen too many situations where small incidents like this spiraled out of control. He didn't want that, but he also wouldn't let anyone treat him with disrespect. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she adjusted her bag over her shoulder. She wanted to leave, to escape the eyes on her, to get away from the unexpected strength and calmness of the man she had just hit. But part of her didn't want to leave. She wanted answers, though she wasn't sure what questions to ask. Marcus finished pumping his gas slowly, deliberately, making sure to control his own reactions. He felt the sting on his cheek fade, but the emotional impact remained. He didn't want to make a scene, but he also wanted the world to know he wouldn't tolerate violence against himself. As Marcus replaced the nozzle and closed his car door, he kept his eyes on Sarah. She looked back at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, it seemed like time had stopped, and the small gas station had become the center of two very different worlds colliding. Finally, Sarah took a step back and muttered, I don't know what to say." Her voice was small, uncertain. Marcus nodded once, quietly. "It's okay. Just think about it," he said, before walking toward his car. The engine started, breaking the tense silence. Sarah watched him drive away, her hands still trembling. She felt a strange mix of fear, guilt, and something she couldn't name. For the first time that day, she questioned herself, her actions, and what she had thought was right. The sun dipped lower, casting the gas station in long orange shadows. Marcus drove slowly away, his mind still buzzing with adrenaline and shock. The world felt the same, yet different, like the moment had shifted something invisible between people. Neither of them knew it yet, but this brief, explosive encounter would follow them far beyond the gas station. It would challenge their assumptions, their pride, and force them to confront their own emotions in ways they hadn't imagined. The gas station had returned to its normal rhythm, but the air still felt heavy. Cars came and went, engines humming, but for Sarah and Marcus, the world had shifted in a single moment. Sarah stepped back from the pump, her chest tight, her hands trembling slightly. She could feel the eyes of other customers on her, judging her silently. Some stared in disbelief, some whispered to each other. She felt small, exposed, and for the first time unsure of herself. What had she just done? What had she expected to happen? She hadn't thought it would go this way. Marcus had walked to his car but didn't leave immediately. He paused, glancing around the gas station. He wanted to make sure Sarah wouldn't escalate again. He felt the sting on his cheek, the echo of her slap in his mind. But more than that, he felt something heavier. The weight of being judged not just for defending himself, but for being a black man in a world that often misunderstood him. Tatro, gas station attendant, had stepped out cautiously. "Is everything okay here?" he asked, glancing between Sarah and Marcus. His tone was polite but wary. Marcus nodded slowly. "Yes, thank you. Just a misunderstanding," he said, keeping his voice calm. He didn't want trouble, but he also wouldn't apologize for protecting himself. Sarah shook her head, still trembling. I don't know what came over me," she admitted. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. She felt a mix of anger and shame, confusion and fear. She had never expected to feel like this. A few bystanders gathered, drawn by the tension. One older man muttered under his breath about people losing respect for others these days. Another woman shook her head and whispered to her friend, clearly taking sides. Sarah noticed them staring at Marcus with suspicion, as if he had done something wrong. It made her chest tighten even more. She didn't like the judgment she saw in their eyes, and for the first time, she wondered if she had been wrong. Marcus felt their stares too, and a familiar frustration rose in him. He had learned long ago that no matter what he did, people sometimes assumed the worst about him because of his skin color. Today, he hadn't even done anything wrong, just defended himself. But the assumptions were there anyway. He took a deep breath and tried to steady himself. Sarah, meanwhile, felt a sharp pang of guilt. She had acted on impulse, letting anger and stress take over her reason. She hadn't even thought about Marcus as a person. She had only reacted. And now, seeing his calm and composed reaction, she realized how wrong she had been. Her chest felt heavy with regret. The silence was broken by the sound of a police siren in the distance. Marcus glanced toward the street. He had hoped it wouldn't come to this, but he knew some witness had probably called the authorities. Sarah's eyes widened, and she instinctively took a step back, almost tripping over her own feet. 2 police officers arrived quickly, their presence commanding attention. They parked their car in front of the station and stepped out, surveying the scene. The bystanders stepped aside, some still whispering, some pointing at Sarah and Marcus. Everyone. "Okay here?" one officer asked, his tone professional but cautious. Marcus nodded. "I'm fine. It was just a misunderstanding," he said, his voice steady despite the tension still in his chest. Sarah swallowed hard. She couldn't meet his eyes at first, then finally forced herself to look. I didn't mean to. It just... Her voice faltered. She felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The officers separated them slightly and began taking statements. Sarah fumbled with her words, trying to explain her anger and stress without admitting too much. Marcus, on the other hand, spoke calmly and clearly, recounting exactly what had happened from his perspective. The bystanders were quiet, watching carefully as the police took notes. Some still whispered, judging, while others simply looked concerned. Marcus noticed a few people holding up their phones, recording the scene. He felt a flicker of irritation. In the age of social media, he knew this moment could spread quickly, taken out of context, and he braced himself for that possibility. After the officers finished, they gave both Marcus and Sarah warnings, telling them to stay calm and avoid further conflict. Neither was arrested, but the tension didn't leave the air. Marcus finished what he had started, his gas tank full, and got into his car. Sarah watched him drive away, feeling a mix of relief and lingering guilt. She wanted to apologize, but the words seemed impossible to speak. Once Marcus was gone, Sarah leaned against her car, her head in her hands. She felt exposed and vulnerable in a way she had never experienced. The adrenaline had left her, and now only the shame remained. She thought about how quickly anger could make a person act in ways they would later regret. She had thought she could scare him, control the situation, but he had shown strength, dignity, and calm. Marcus drove slowly down the road, replaying the incident in his mind. He felt proud that he had maintained control, but he also felt the sting of being hit for no reason. He thought about the assumptions people would make, the stories that might circulate about him. He thought about how easy it was for a moment of anger to turn into a much bigger problem. By the time he reached home, Marcus was tired, not from work, but from the emotional weight of the afternoon. He sat in his car for a moment before getting out, trying to calm himself. Inside, he knew he would need to explain the incident to his family, to friends who might have already seen the video on social media. He didn't want them to worry, but he also knew he couldn't hide the truth. Sarah returned home as well, her mind spinning. She avoided looking at herself in the mirror, afraid of what she might see. She felt the sting of her own actions and the discomfort of realizing she had been wrong. She thought about Marcus, about his calm response, about the strength he had shown. She wondered how she could face him again. or if she ever would. That night, both of them lay awake, thinking about the encounter. Sarah thought about control, power, and the mistakes anger could bring. Marcus thought about restraint, dignity, and the way the world sometimes judged too quickly. Both were changed in small ways, both feeling the impact of a moment that should have been insignificant but had become unforgettable. Neither could know what would happen next, or how this encounter would follow them in unexpected ways. But one thing was certain: neither would forget the sting of the slap or the shock of the response. The gas station incident was done for now, but the emotions it stirred would last far longer. The day after the gas station incident, the town seemed quieter, but the echoes of what had happened were everywhere. Marcus woke up early, but he couldn't stop thinking about the previous afternoon. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Sarah's. Hand striking him, felt the sting on his cheek, and remembered the weight of the shocked eyes around them. He tried to focus on work, but even the simplest tasks felt heavy. Every email he opened, every phone call he answered, reminded him that life had a way of moving on, while the moments that mattered, moments of judgment and misunderstanding, stayed behind. He wondered how many people had recorded the incident, on their phones, and if the video had already started circulating on social media. Meanwhile, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, staring blankly at a cup of coffee. Her hands shook slightly as she stirred it, thinking about the slap, about Marcus, and about the disbelief she had seen in his eyes. Her pride had been bruised, but deeper than that was guilt, a sharp, uncomfortable feeling she couldn't shake. She had never expected that one impulsive act would weigh so heavily on her. By mid-morning, word of the incident had spread. The gas station attendants and some customers had shared the story with neighbors. Soon, the social media posts began to appear. Videos of the slap and the reaction circulated quickly, each clip showing slightly different angles, each comment reflecting a mix of opinions. Some people criticized Sarah, some defended her, and some criticized Marcus. The arguments were loud, quick, and unfiltered. Marcus saw some of the videos. He felt a wave of frustration. People online assumed so much without knowing the truth. Some called him aggressive. Others praised his restraint. He sighed and tried to ignore it, reminding himself that only those who truly knew him could understand. Still, it hurt. It hurt to see the moment replayed and twisted in so many ways. Sarah, on the other hand, found herself scrolling nervously. Her heart sank with every comment she read. People called her impulsive, rude, and disrespectful. She wanted to defend, herself to explain, but the truth felt inadequate. How could she explain that she had acted without thinking, out of stress and anger? How could she convey the shock she felt when Marcus responded with calm but firm strength? At work, Marcus could feel the tension creeping in. A co-worker mentioned the incident casually, not knowing how much Marcus had already seen. He felt a tightness in his chest, but he kept his expression neutral. He knew that reacting with anger could escalate things, so he stayed calm, polite, and professional. Inside, however, his emotions swirled. Anger, disappointment, and a lingering sadness about how quickly society judged him based on appearances. Sarah's day was no easier. Her friends and family noticed her distracted mood. She replayed the incident in her mind over and over, seeing Marcus's calm face, the shock in his eyes when he had hit back. She realized how little she had thought about the consequences, about how a single moment could spiral into something much bigger. She felt a need to apologize, to make things right, but she didn't know where to start. The town became a place of quiet tension. People whispered when they passed the gas station. The employees at the convenience store were nervous, unsure if more trouble would come. Some of the regular customers took sides. Some avoided the station entirely. The incident, small as it seemed at first, had made a mark on the town's atmosphere. That evening, Marcus sat on his porch, thinking. He reflected on the incident not just as an isolated event, but as a reminder of the challenges he faced daily. He thought about how quickly anger and fear could cause people to act without considering the consequences. He also thought about dignity and self-control, how important it was to maintain both, even in difficult moments. Sarah, meanwhile, found herself unable to sleep. She thought about the incident, the social media reactions, and the conversations she had avoided. She realized that her actions were more than a private mistake. They had become a public spectacle. Her stress and anger had affected not only herself and Marcus, but also everyone who witnessed or heard about the incident. She felt small, almost invisible under the weight of public judgment. The next morning, the tension continued. Marcus received messages from friends checking if he was okay. He felt grateful for their support, but he also knew that many people would never understand the full story. Sarah received calls and texts as well, some expressing concern, some expressing judgment. She felt the sting of criticism and the sharp edge of regret simultaneously. By midday, both Marcus and Sarah had been forced to confront the incident in ways they hadn't expected. Marcus reflected on fairness, on restraint, and on the importance of standing up for oneself without losing control. Sarah reflected on impulsivity, on the consequences of anger, and on the need to see others as human beings rather than obstacles in a moment of frustration. In the days that followed, the gas station incident became a quiet lesson for the town. People talked about it in hushed tones, some as gossip, some as a warning about impulsive behavior. Marcus and Sarah, though moving in separate directions physically, were connected in the emotional aftermath. Each thought about the other, each carried the memory of the slap, the strike, and the shock that had followed. Even without seeing each other, their lives were now intertwined. The incident had left a mark, not just on their own hearts, but on the town, on the witnesses, and on the people who would hear the story through social media. It was a reminder of how a single action, small as it might seem, could ripple outward, affecting many lives in unexpected ways. By evening, Marcus finally felt a measure of calm return. He knew the incident would not be forgotten, but he also knew he had acted with integrity. He could face the world with his head held high. Sarah, too, began to understand the weight of her actions. She felt a mixture of shame and resolve, knowing that she had to learn from this moment to become more thoughtful, more careful, and more aware of her reactions. Neither of them could yet imagine what would come next. They did not know how the incident might affect their future interactions, or whether the town would continue to watch them, waiting for the next moment of tension. But both felt the pull of reflection, the need to think about what had happened, why it had happened, and what lessons could be drawn from it. For Marcus and Sarah, the gas station incident was no longer just a brief encounter. It had become a test of character, a lesson in patience, and a reminder that anger and misunderstanding could have consequences far beyond the moment. The story was still unfolding, and both of them were only at the beginning of understanding what it meant for themselves and for everyone who had witnessed it. The following morning, Marcus sat quietly at his kitchen table, staring at his cup of coffee as sunlight streamed through the window. His mind replayed the gas station incident over and over. He had expected anger, confusion, and maybe fear after the slap, but what had surprised him most was how quickly the world seemed to judge him. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Officer Daniels, the local police officer who had responded to the incident at the gas station. He looked serious but not hostile. "Morning, Marcus," the officer said politely. "I just wanted to follow up about yesterday. We may need a formal statement if any complaints are filed." Marcus nodded. "Of course, I'll cooperate. I just want to make sure the truth is clear." Officer Daniels gave a small nod and left Marcus with his thoughts. Marcus knew the law could complicate things, even though he hadn't done anything wrong. The idea of paperwork, questions, and possible legal scrutiny made his chest tighten. He was frustrated that a single moment, a misunderstanding, could turn into something potentially serious. Meanwhile, Sarah faced her own confrontation with reality. The previous night, she had barely slept. Her phone was full of missed calls and messages, some from friends asking if she was okay, some offering advice, and some more critical than she could handle. She had to face the fact that her impulsive act of anger had consequences beyond her control. By mid-morning, Sarah received a call from the local police station. She felt her stomach twist as the officer on the line asked her to come in and give a statement about the gas station incident. Her hands shook as she agreed, realizing that her actions might have real consequences she hadn't considered before. When she arrived, she noticed Marcus was already there. Their eyes met briefly, and for a moment, neither knew how to react. Marcus nodded politely but without warmth, acknowledging her presence but keeping a careful distance. Sarah felt her guilt deepen. She had acted without thinking, and now she was forced to face the reality of what she had done. Inside, the officers asked them to recount their versions of events. Marcus spoke calmly, detailing what had happened from the moment she slapped him to his measured reaction. His words were clear, composed, and firm, leaving little room for misunderstanding. Sarah struggled with her own statement. She wanted to explain her anger and stress, but realized it could not justify her actions. I was upset, she admitted, quietly. It was wrong of me. I didn't mean to cause harm. Her voice was small, almost swallowed by the official setting. She felt ashamed, and Marcus could see the genuine regret in her eyes, even though he didn't say anything. The officers listened carefully, taking notes. They asked a few clarifying questions, but remained neutral. After a while, they stepped aside to discuss the situation privately. Marcus and Sarah were left standing together, awkwardly, in silence. The tension was thick, filled with unspoken words. Outside the station, the town was buzzing with whispers. People had already started to hear about the legal follow-up, and opinions were spreading. Some felt Marcus had overreacted, while others felt Sarah's behavior had been unacceptable. Social media posts had multiplied, with hashtags, comments, and shared videos fueling debates and heated arguments. Marcus walked home slowly, thinking about how quickly public opinion could shape reality. He had done nothing wrong, yet he felt the weight of judgment from strangers who only saw a moment, not the full story. He thought about dignity, about the importance of restraint, and about how easily one incident could escalate into something far larger than intended. Sarah left the station later, feeling emotionally drained. Every step felt heavier than the last. She couldn't shake the mix of embarrassment, guilt, and fear she carried. She realized that her actions had consequences beyond a slap, beyond her own anger. She had created ripples she could not control, affecting both Marcus and the people around her. That evening, both Marcus and Sarah reflected on the events separately. Marcus sat with a friend, explaining the situation calmly and honestly. His friend nodded, offering support and encouragement, reminding Marcus that he had acted with integrity and self-respect. Marcus felt a measure of relief, knowing that at least someone understood his perspective. Sarah, meanwhile, confided in her sister. She admitted how impulsive she had been and how ashamed she felt. Her sister listened without judgment but offered guidance. She needed to take responsibility, to reflect on her behavior, and to find a way to make amends if possible. Sarah nodded silently, knowing her path toward redemption would not be easy. Over the next few days, both Marcus and Sarah were forced to confront the social consequences as well. Conversations at work, at school, and even in the grocery store carried an unspoken tension. People were aware of the incident, some avoiding them, some staring, and some asking questions they weren't sure how to answer. It was a reminder of how a brief moment of conflict could linger in public memory far longer than expected. Despite the discomfort, Marcus tried to focus on positive action. He reminded himself that he had handled the situation with dignity and self-control. He thought about how important it was to remain calm, even when provoked, and how vital it was to protect himself without resorting to aggression. Sarah's path was harder. She spent long hours thinking about what had happened, about the anger she had felt, and the regret she now carried. She realized that personal reflection was not enough. She had to consider how to face Marcus and perhaps seek reconciliation. The thought made her nervous, but she knew it was necessary for growth and understanding. By the end of the week, the town had settled into a cautious rhythm. The gas station returned to its usual business, but the memory of the incident lingered. For Marcus and Sarah, the experience had already begun to shape them in unexpected ways. They were learning lessons about restraint, accountability, and empathy, lessons that went beyond a slap and a reaction, reaching deep into character and human connection. Both felt a growing sense of anticipation, though neither could yet imagine what the next encounter would bring. The story of the gas station incident was far from over. It had moved from a simple misunderstanding to a test of character, a lesson in public scrutiny, and an awakening to personal responsibility. Marcus and Sarah were on a path that would challenge their assumptions, push them to reflect deeply, and eventually perhaps offer a chance for understanding and reconciliation. Marcus sat in his living room staring out the window at the quiet street. The world outside seemed normal, but inside his mind was still full of the gas station incident. He thought about the slap, the shock, and the reaction. More than anything, he thought about how quickly a single action could change everything. He remembered the look on Sarah's face, the mix of surprise, anger, and something else he couldn't name. He wondered if she realized the weight of her actions, or if she had moved on as if nothing had happened. Marcus knew that the memory of the slap would stay with him longer than the moment itself, like a shadow he couldn't shake. Across town, Sarah paced her apartment, restless and uneasy. She had replayed the incident in her mind countless times. Each time, she saw Marcus's calm expression, the way he had handled himself with dignity. She felt a sharp pang of guilt. She had acted impulsively, letting anger and stress take control, and now she faced the consequences not only from the law, but from her own conscience. Sarah thought about what it meant to be truly accountable. It wasn't enough to feel regret in private. She knew she had to confront her mistake openly to understand how her actions affected someone else. The thought of reaching out to Marcus made her nervous. What if he hated her? What if he refused to listen? But deep down, she knew she couldn't move forward without facing him, even if it was just to apologize. Marcus, meanwhile, reflected on the nature of conflict. He had seen many incidents in life where misunderstandings spiraled out of control, where anger led to consequences far worse than anyone expected. He realized that staying calm and measured didn't make him weak. It showed strength. It gave him control over his own actions, even when others tried to provoke him. That evening, Marcus decided to take a walk. He needed to clear his head and find some peace. The streets were quiet, and the cool air helped him think more clearly. He considered reaching out to Sarah, not to confront her, but to understand the situation fully. He knew communication could prevent future misunderstandings and perhaps even lead to reconciliation. At the same time, Sarah was struggling with her own emotions. She couldn't sleep well, couldn't focus at work, and felt the tension in her chest every time she thought about Marcus. She realized that her anger at the time had been misplaced. She had been reacting to stress and frustration, not to Marcus himself. She wanted to make amends, not for appearances or social judgment, but because it was the right thing to do. The next day, Marcus received a message from a mutual friend who had witnessed the gas station incident. The friend suggested that Marcus and Sarah meet, just to talk and clarify things. Marcus hesitated. He didn't want to reopen old wounds, but he also knew that avoiding the conversation would leave the tension unresolved. After some thought, he agreed. Sarah received the same message. Her heart raced as she read it. Meeting Marcus meant facing her mistake head-on, and she knew she couldn't back down. She felt a mix of fear and relief, knowing that the opportunity to apologize and explain was finally here. The day of the meeting arrived, and the tension was palpable. They agreed to meet at a neutral location, a quiet park with benches and trees. Marcus arrived first, sitting calmly, watching people pass by. He felt a flicker of nervousness, but mostly he focused on staying composed. Sarah arrived shortly after, walking slowly toward him. Her hands were slightly trembling, and she avoided making direct eye contact at first. When she finally spoke, her voice was small but steady. "Marcus, I wanted to say I'm sorry. I shouldn't have hit you. I lost control and it was wrong." Marcus listened quietly, nodding. He could see the sincerity in her eyes. He responded gently, "Thank you for saying that. I know you didn't mean it, but it hurt. I was shocked, and I had to defend myself. I hope we can move past it." The conversation continued, awkward at first, but gradually becoming more natural. Sarah explained her stress and frustration, not as an excuse, but as context. Marcus shared his perspective, talking about the importance of dignity and restraint. They listened to each other, really listened, in a way that allowed understanding to grow. As they talked, the tension slowly eased. Sarah admitted her guilt and her need to do better. Marcus acknowledged the difficulty of controlling anger in stressful situations. They began to see each other not as opponents or strangers, but as human beings who had made mistakes and wanted to learn from them. By the end of their meeting, both felt a sense of relief. They shook hands, a small but significant gesture of mutual respect. It wasn't perfect. There were still lingering emotions and questions. But for the first time since the incident, there was hope. Hope that the anger, the shock, and the tension could be replaced by understanding and empathy. Marcus walked away from the park, feeling lighter. He had faced the situation directly, and it had strengthened his sense of control and dignity. Sarah stayed for a moment longer, reflecting on her actions and the importance of accountability. She realized that facing mistakes head-on, no matter how uncomfortable, was the only way to grow. The incident at the gas station had changed them both. It had been painful, confusing, and emotional, but it had also opened a path for reflection, understanding, and growth. They had learned lessons about anger, judgment, and the importance of seeing others as human beings rather than obstacles or threats. Neither Marcus nor Sarah could forget the incident completely, but they could choose how it would shape them moving forward. They could choose growth over anger, understanding over judgment, and empathy over impulsivity. The encounter had left its mark, but it had also created the possibility for healing and mutual respect. As the sun set that evening, casting a warm, orange glow over the park, both Marcus and Sarah felt a quiet sense of peace. The tension of the past days had begun to lift, replaced by reflection, understanding, and a cautious hope for the future. It was the beginning of a new chapter for both of them, one in which mistakes could become lessons and conflict could become a chance for connection. The morning sun filtered softly through the trees, painting the park in shades of gold. Marcus arrived early, walking along the path slowly, feeling the weight of the past days ease slightly with each step. The memory of the gas station incident still lingered, but today was different. Today he had agreed to meet Sarah again, not out of obligation, but to try to understand and perhaps even forgive. Sarah arrived a few minutes later, her steps tentative. She held her bag tightly, a mix of nerves and determination in her eyes. The memory of slapping Marcus still made her stomach churn, but she knew she couldn't run from it anymore. She had apologized before, but she wanted to show that she was serious about learning and improving herself. They sat on a bench facing each other, the distance between them cautious but deliberate. Neither spoke immediately, letting the quiet of the park settle around them. Birds chirped overhead, and the distant hum of traffic created a strange sense of normalcy, as if the world had continued on while their lives had been temporarily paused in that moment of conflict. Sarah was the first to speak. "Marcus, I've been thinking a lot about what happened," she said softly. "I know I hurt you and I feel awful about it. I want to understand how you felt when I hit you." Marcus nodded slowly. He appreciated her willingness to ask, to listen, and to really consider his feelings. "At first," he admitted, "I was shocked. I didn't expect it. And I felt, I don't know, a mix of hurt and anger. But I knew I couldn't let anger control me. I had to defend myself, yes, but I also had to stay calm." Sarah listened carefully, nodding. Her guilt deepened, but she also felt a growing sense of respect for him. "I can't imagine how hard it must be," she said quietly, "to stay calm when someone strikes you. I mean, I've never had to deal with anything like that. I acted on impulse, and it wasn't fair." Marcus offered a small smile. "It's not easy, but staying calm helps you control the situation. It helps you protect yourself without causing more harm. I'm glad you're trying to understand." They talked for a long time, carefully exploring what had happened. Sarah explained the stress and frustration she had felt, not as an excuse, but as context. She admitted how quickly anger had taken over, and how much she regretted it afterward. Marcus shared his perspective, the internal struggle between shock, self-defense, and the need to remain composed. As the conversation continued, Sarah began to see Marcus not just as the man she had slapped, but as a person with feelings, dignity, and patience. She realized how much she had misjudged him in the heat of the moment, letting her assumptions and stress cloud her judgment. Marcus, in turn, began to understand that Sarah's actions had not come from malice, but from a moment of stress and frustration. He saw the genuine remorse in her eyes and heard it in her voice. It didn't erase the past, but it allowed him to soften a little, to let go of some of the lingering tension and fear he had felt. The conversation eventually shifted to broader topics: how people react under stress, how assumptions and misunderstandings can escalate quickly, and how important it is to communicate honestly. They shared small personal stories, laughing quietly at moments of shared humanity. It was strange, but comforting. They were no longer just two strangers caught in conflict. They were two people trying to understand, learning from a difficult experience. At one point, Sarah hesitated, then asked a difficult question. Do you think people treat you differently because of your skin? I mean, that day I felt like, I don't know, maybe I was influenced by assumptions too." Marcus sighed. "Sometimes. People make assumptions without knowing you. It's frustrating and it hurts. But I try not to let it control me. It reminds me why staying calm and dignified is so important. And talking about it like we are now helps." Sarah nodded, absorbing his words. She realized that her actions were part of a larger world, one where assumptions and misunderstandings were common, and where people often acted without thinking about consequences. It was a lesson she wouldn't forget. After some time, they both fell silent, watching the sunlight filter through the leaves. The tension that had hung between them for days was finally easing. It wasn't gone completely. Moments like the gas station incident could never be erased, but it had shifted into something else: understanding, empathy, and the first steps toward forgiveness. "I'm glad we did this," Sarah said finally. "I needed to understand, and I think I've learned a lot. About myself, about anger, and about treating people with respect." Marcus nodded. "And I've learned too, about patience." about communication, and about the strength it takes to respond calmly. This was hard, but it taught both of us something important. They stood up, stretching slightly, both feeling the weight of the past days lighten. Sarah extended her hand first, and Marcus shook it firmly. It was a small gesture, but it carried a lot: acknowledgement, respect, and a willingness to move forward. As they walked away from the bench, side by side for a moment, they felt the first hints of closure. They didn't need to be friends, and they didn't need to forget what happened, but they could move forward with greater understanding and empathy. The gas station incident had challenged them, but it had also created an opportunity for growth and reflection. By the time they parted ways, both Marcus and Sarah felt a quiet sense of peace. The world hadn't changed, and the town still whispered about what had happened, but for them, the personal storm had calmed, replaced by lessons learned and a shared recognition of human complexity. As they each went back to their separate lives, they carried with them something new, a reminder that understanding and empathy could bridge divides, even in the most unexpected circumstances. The incident at the gas station had tested their patience, their emotions, and their assumptions, but it had also opened a path toward personal growth and mutual respect. And though the future was uncertain, both of them knew one thing: they had faced the aftermath together, honestly and openly, and that was the beginning of a change neither would forget. Weeks had passed since the gas station incident, but its memory lingered in both Marcus and Sarah. Life had resumed, but a quiet tension still hummed beneath the surface. For Marcus, it was a reminder of restraint, dignity, and the complexity of human interaction. For Sarah, it was a lesson in humility, accountability, and the power of reflection. One bright Saturday morning, Marcus decided to take a walk through the town's Central Park. He had grown accustomed to thinking deeply during these walks, using the calm of nature to organize his thoughts. He reflected on how much had changed since that day. The incident had started as a brief, shocking moment, yet it had led to something neither of them had expected: real personal growth. As he walked, he noticed Sarah sitting on a bench near the fountain. She was sketching in a notebook, her brow furrowed in concentration. Marcus hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to approach, but then he remembered their last conversation, the honest, open talk they had shared. He had seen the potential for understanding, and today he felt ready to bridge the distance fully. "Sarah?" he called gently. She looked up, slightly startled, then smiled, a mixture of relief and warmth. "Marcus, hi." He walked toward her, hands in his pockets, feeling a mix of nerves and calm. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. "Not at all," she replied, closing her notebook. For a moment, they simply sat in silence, listening to the faint sound of water trickling from the fountain, and children laughing in the distance. The park felt alive, peaceful, and yet reflective, a place where they could speak freely without judgment. "I've been thinking a lot," Marcus began, "about that day, and about how we both reacted. I realized something important. Anger and impulsiveness can create conflict, but understanding and patience, they can really change how we experience moments like that." Sarah nodded slowly, absorbing his words. "I've realized the same. I let stress and frustration control me. I acted without thinking about the consequences, about how it would affect you or anyone watching. I've learned a lot since then about responsibility and empathy." They shared a small smile, the tension from the past days finally softening into something like mutual respect. Sarah took a deep breath. "I want you to know I truly regret what I did. I want to move forward, not just for me, but so that we both can leave this behind and learn from it." Marcus nodded. "I appreciate that, and I think we can. I don't want to hold on to anger or fear. What happened? It was a mistake, yes, but it's also a lesson. And I think we've both grown because of it. The conversation shifted naturally to other topics, small pieces of their lives they hadn't shared before. They spoke about work, family, and their hopes for the future. For the first time since the incident, the awkwardness was gone, replaced by genuine curiosity and human connection. Sarah laughed softly at a story Marcus told about a funny encounter at his job, and he smiled at her response, noticing how her presence felt calmer, less tense. It was a simple moment, yet it carried a weight neither could have imagined when the slap had happened. They were no longer just two strangers connected by conflict. They were two people learning to understand and respect each other. I think. The hardest part, Sarah said thoughtfully, was realizing that people's assumptions can be so wrong. I judged you in a moment, and it nearly ruined everything. I want to be more aware, more careful about how I react to others. Marcus nodded. And I've realized how important it is to stay calm, no matter what happens, to respond with dignity, even when it's difficult. I'm glad we could talk, because it's shown me how much perspective matters. The afternoon sun began to lower, casting golden light across the park. The warmth seemed to mirror the calm growing between them. Sarah looked at Marcus and smiled, a small, sincere gesture. I'm grateful for this. Grateful we could talk and understand each other. I don't want this incident to define either of us. Neither do I, Marcus replied. It doesn't define us. It challenged us, yes, but it also taught us something important, and I think that's what matters most. They stood together, stretching slightly, as the cool breeze stirred the leaves around them. For the first time since the incident, there was no awkwardness, no tension, just a quiet understanding. They didn't need to be friends immediately, nor did they need to pretend the incident never happened. But they could choose how it would shape their lives moving forward, and that choice gave them both a sense of control and peace. I think we've both learned a lot, Sarah said, her voice calm, and I hope we continue to learn, not just from this, but from everything life throws at us. Marcus smiled. Absolutely. Life is full of challenges, and how we respond defines us more than the events themselves. I think we've taken a big step today. As they walked out of the park together, side by side for a few moments, it was clear that something meaningful had changed. The gas station incident, once a moment of conflict and shock, had transformed into a story of growth, reflection, and mutual respect. They were not enemies, nor were they simply bystanders in a heated moment. They were people who had faced difficulty, learned from it, and come through stronger on the other side. By evening, both Marcus and Sarah returned to their homes with a quiet sense of closure. The incident no longer weighed heavily on them. Instead, it had become a turning point, a moment that had tested patience, character, and understanding, but ultimately led to growth and emotional resilience. The town continued its routines, the whispers and social judgments fading as days passed. But for Marcus and Sarah, the experience remained a reminder of the importance of empathy, accountability, and the strength it takes to face mistakes openly. It was a lesson they would carry with them for the rest of their lives, one that would guide how they reacted, how they treated others, and how they grew as human beings. As night fell and the stars appeared in the sky, both Marcus and Sarah felt a sense of peace that had been absent for weeks. The tension, the fear, the judgment, they had faced it, understood it, and moved beyond it. The gas station incident had ended not in anger or division, but in personal growth, understanding, and the quiet hope that humanity could rise above impulsiveness and conflict, one step at a time. And in that moment, both knew that life, with all its challenges and unexpected encounters, had offered them a profound lesson, one in which they had chosen reflection over reaction, understanding over judgment, and growth over resentment.